Are we ready to come back? I forgot to tell you to share your name. I hope you did that. Got names and religious tradition. And let's hear some of the memories that you shared, either good or bad, from... Yes, sir.
I will share.
Okay, do it loudly, please.
What?
Loudly.
Loudly. Okay. So I was raised in Appleton, which is about a half an hour's drive from the epicenter of Football International in Green Bay. And for whatever reason, I don't know who planned this, but the congregation had its congregation meeting at 12 noon one day on a Sunday. But this was in the early 80s, and for those people who maybe don't know, the Packers weren't that good then. It was really bad. So maybe that's why they could get people to come to the congregational meeting at that time. Anyway, I went to the congregational meeting. I was only 7 with my parents who didn't have daycare. So here's the story. I had the game, I jerry-rigged my Walkman, which we had in the 80s, and, have just one earpiece in while the meeting was going on, and the Packers so happened to score a touchdown, and I did not know that you're louder when you have an earpiece in. I announced very loudly, the whole place and the whole meeting turned around slowly to the kid in the back who should have been listening to the meeting, but rather was watching.
I feel like you'd get a free pass at 7 years old for that. That's great.
Even now.
Yeah. Hey, who else has a memory to share?
I can share one.
Thank you.
So growing up, I grew up in an ELCA church just outside the Madison area. And growing up, I always went on mission trips.
Yep.
And one of my fondest memories was going to Joplin, Mississippi, after the tornado hit when I was in high school. And I mean, just the impact that we had and all of the steps prior to our mission trip where we were fundraising and getting to know each other as a youth group. My mom actually was one of our youth leaders, so she joined with too, and it was just such a unique, good experience to have in high school and something I'll always cherish.
Yeah, I got to do those when I was in high school too, and they changed me.
Yeah,
for sure.
With the right group of people, they're a ton of fun.
Yeah, and we do those at St. Matthew's. I'm so glad that we do. Any other memories you'd like to share?
I'll share one.
Yes.
So I'll actually go for a not so great one. So I was raised Catholic, and I remember when I was going through confirmation classes, one of the things I had to do was take 100-question multiple choice test, and I didn't pass because I was a terrible test taker.
Yeah.
And then I had to meet one-on-one with the priest, and I remember I was 16 or 17, and I was terrified. And I still went through with the confirmation, and I'm pretty sure I did it for my parents and my grandmother who was alive at the time, because it was probably one of the most pivotal moments in my faith journey of wait a minute, this shouldn't define my relationship with God. Yeah. So just kind of one that sticks out. It's pretty core. So
yeah.
100
question multiple choice test isn't exactly what I would base faith on either. That's me. Any other memories? Okay. Do we have people who are already part of the ELCA in the new member class? Or are just kind of transferring from another ELCA congregation? Do we have former Catholics, Roman Catholics? Yep. I always say Roman Catholics make the best Lutherans. And any other traditions out there that I missed?
Wisconsin Synod.
Okay. Okay. So what would you like to know by the end of our time together today? What are you curious about when it comes to faith, or the ELCA, or St. Matthew's? What would you like to know? Yes?
I'm really curious about the traditions and just thinking with Lent coming up and all the things we would do in the Catholic Church, what does that look like here,
Yeah.
So I'm curious about Lutheran traditions and
Yeah, especially with Lent coming up, how do we celebrate Lent and Holy Week and Easter especially, but traditions in
Yeah,
general.
because it feels like there's quite a few expectations or rules with the Catholic faith
Yes.
around that season of the church, so I'm just curious what that.
Okay, great. Yes.
How do the core tenets and stances of the church get decided or derived from?
Okay, so how does the ELCA come to a place of this is what we believe about
Yeah.
X, Y, or Z? Okay, yes.
This is a simple one, the sign of the cross, because I see some people doing it and some people not, and I think, are those the old Catholics making the sign? Or, what does that mean?
Yeah, some people make the sign of the cross, some people don't. And are the ones who are doing it former Catholics? Is it okay for Lutherans to make the sign of the cross? Yes.
I was just gonna say, what's the elevator pitch of if someone says well, what's an ELCA church? What's your 2-minute defining answer?
Good one,
I know
good
that's
one.
a tough question,
Yeah.
but
Yes.
Yes, Carly.
I know, but I asked and then I don't know what to say.
Okay, so anything else you want to know? Pastor Kevin, is he in here?
I am here.
Yeah, will you help me remember these things that people want to know?
Yes,
Okay.
I can.
great. And please keep your questions in mind if we don't get to them. Okay, I think I'll start with the sign of the cross because I think I'm not gonna just naturally hit on that in this presentation and I don't wanna forget it. So, the sign of the cross is a Christian thing. It's not a Catholic thing or a Lutheran thing or an Episcopalian thing. It went out of fashion for non-Catholics during a time when there was a lot of prejudice against the Catholic Church. So if you think about how maybe nervous people were or questioning when JFK became president, right? So it wasn't, Lutherans didn't want to look like Catholics or be mistaken for Catholics. So the sign of the cross kind of went out of fashion, right? But it has come back because it's not about not looking like one religion or another, right? It's about recognizing the name of the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And it's a blessing to yourself. And sometimes I think about it as almost this is me personally, as a shield, right? As making a personal bubble around myself of blessing. Pastor Kevin, do you want to say anything more about the sign of the cross?
I don't have to, no.
Yeah,
I guess
okay.
in short, I'd say that with that anti-Catholic, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
With that anti-Catholic prejudice, Martin Luther, the namesake of our tradition, had some pretty choice words to say about, for instance, the Pope at the kind of around the time the Lutheran Church got formed, because Luther got kind of fought with some authorities, got kicked out, and then said some kind of mean things on the way out. It was kind of just and for kind of centuries, and still in certain expressions of Lutheranism, there's still this kind of anti-Catholic chest thumping that happens, but in the last few decades, the I'd say that the mainstream view globally about from both Lutherans and I'd say many Catholics too, were yeah, we were kind of seeing red at that moment. That wasn't great. Let's kind of cut back the mean rhetoric, and then beneath it realize that there were more interpersonal dispute was really a bigger issue than anything else. So that some of that anti-Catholic sentiment has really faded in the last few centuries or last few decades.
Yeah. So what it comes down to is you can make the sign of the cross and you can't. You don't have to, right? So if you've never done that before, give it a try. See how it feels. And but there's no requirement about this, and it's not just former Catholics who haven't given up the habit yet, right? It's Lutherans too. Does that help? Okay, great. Let's do a very quick, condensed, slapdash church history lesson that's like 2,000 years of church history in just a couple minutes. So, there was never a single the church, right? When after Jesus had his ministry, after he died and rose again, there were many different communities. So there was never just one ideal church that we can like try and hearken back to. There were many, okay, that kind of like, there was a community where they read the Gospel of Luke. There was one where they read the Gospel of Matthew, right? Like, so all different communities that kind of came together, were brought together in the 4th century under Emperor Constantine, okay? So this is the 4th century. And there are differing accounts of how that happened. Some people say that he had this like miraculous conversion and really truly became a faithful Christian. And because he was the emperor, everybody was the religion that he was, right? So like overnight, the empire becomes Christian. Some people say the empire was falling apart and he needed a way to kind of unite everybody to fight a war. So let's fight under the Christian flag, right? So there's differing accounts of how that all happened. But this is where we get like a consolidated church that then has a hierarchy and puts together things like creeds. So then this church goes along. And in 1052, so in the 11th century, the Eastern Church split from the Western Church. So this is the Eastern Church, which is like Greek Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox. All of those churches in the eastern side of the empire, of the Roman Empire, split off. We have the Western Church, and that was the Roman Church. And then a guy named Martin Luther came along, and in, we'll say, 1517, put together in writing the things that he felt were corrupt about the Roman Catholic Church, like the paying of indulgences to get people out of hell, right? Like, and every Reformation Day we talk about Martin Luther, so I can't go into it right now, but trust me, he wrote these theses. It happened to coincide with the invention of the printing press, so he could print out copies and copies of these things that he felt was wrong with the Catholic Church and spread the news far and wide. Before Martin Luther and the printing press, they just burned people at the stake, and it was over, right? But with the printing press, the word got out. So in 1517, the Roman Church split, and one branch continued as the Roman Catholic Church, and then there became this new line of the church, the Protestant church, because they were protesting the Catholic Church, right? So they're the Protestants. And then very quickly, because there were lots of other reformers besides Martin Luther, they're split off more and more branches of the Protestant church. So there became Methodists and Presbyterians, and Baptists, and all kinds of different forks started to come in the road here. And then people started immigrating to the U.S. The Lutheran Church had a huge presence, of course, in Germany, because that's where Martin Luther was from. But it also moved into Scandinavia. So if you happen to be an immigrant from Scandinavia or from Germany, or what became Germany, and you came over to the U.S., you brought Lutheranism with you. And most of those Scandinavian and German immigrants settled around here, which is why there's lots of Lutheran churches around here, right? And not so many out west, like in Colorado and Wyoming. There's more Mormons out there because that's where those immigrants settled, right? Okay, so then all those different immigrant groups had their own churches that were being conducted in Finnish or Swedish or Norwegian or German. And then they made their own branches, and I'm going to skip way ahead. I'll put Lutherans here. In 1987, several of those branches that were Norwegian, Swedish, German, came together to form the ELCA. There was the ALC. Does anybody remember the ALC or growing up in the ALC? Was the ALC Swedish? No? Swedish? There was the AELC and there was the LCA. And they all came together to make the ELCA in 1987. That is the quickest church history lesson you're ever going to get. My church history professor would be appalled that I did this way. But I wanted you to see, especially for those who are Roman Catholic, that we had 1,500 years of being the church together, then broke apart. So Lutherans come from the Roman Church, which is why a lot of things are going to look really familiar or be the same, or the traditions will be really comfortable for you. Okay. This is, I think, Dave, in response to your question, or hopefully some of it will be in response to your question. What does the ELCA believe? We believe in the Trinity. We believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and we believe in the gospel. And that's true for pretty much every Christian denomination that you can think of. So what makes the ELCA a little bit different, or our particular beliefs? Number one, that we are saved by grace through faith. There is no amount of good work. There's no amount of multiple choice testing that you can do. Yep, that will save you, right? It is Jesus alone. We take the Bible seriously, but not literally. There are other Christian denominations that believe that the Bible is the literal Word of God. ELCA Lutherans do not believe that. And I'm going to draw a really bad picture to show you how. So let's pretend this is a manger. And there's a little baby Jesus in the manger. And in the manger, of course, there's some hay, right? So the way that Martin Luther described the Bible was that the gospel The Bible is the manger that holds the Christ child. Okay? So the Bible is the manger. Jesus and the good news, the message of Jesus, is not the Bible. They're not exactly the same thing, right? And that there's some parts of the Bible that are hay. So he thought the whole book of James should be thrown out of the Bible. He thought it was terrible. There are some passages about how women are saved through childbirth that I would say are hay. Or women being silent in church that I would say that's hay, right? So this is all holy and good, but the Bible is the manger. Jesus, the Word incarnate, the Word made flesh, is different from the Bible. Does that make sense? Okay. We believe in the theology of the cross, which means that God can be found in suffering, not just, it's kind of the opposite of the prosperity gospel, right? So if you believe only good things are going to happen to you, is not Lutheran theology. That often God is found in suffering. And ELCA Lutherans believe that we are 100% saint and 100% sinner all at the same time, which is bad math, but good theology. So when you are baptized, you become a saint of God. In the Catholic Church, you become a saint because of the good works that you've performed. When you know you're given like the actual title of saint. ELCA Lutherans believe you become a saint at your baptism, but you are still a sinner, right? And that you return to your baptism, that you ask for forgiveness, which means that we are all human, we're all flawed, but we are all children of God, all at the same time. Okay. I am still getting to yours, Dave. I thought it was that slide. It's a different slide, sorry. Here's just some frequently asked questions. The ELCA has been ordaining women since 1970 and openly LGBTQIA plus folks since 2009. The ELCA has about 3 million baptized members and 8,500 congregations nationwide. The ELCA is divided into geographic regions and synods. We're in region 5, so creative. And like there's a Rocky Mountain region. That's all of Colorado, all of Wyoming, half of New Mexico. Like that's how few Lutherans there are out there. The region is just huge. There's a synod for St. Paul and a synod for Minneapolis, because there's so many Lutherans there. They have separate synods. Our synod is called the Greater Milwaukee Synod, and it consists of 114 congregations from Racine to Germantown and over to Ixonia. Okay. The ELCA churchwide offices are in Chicago. You can go there and say hi to the people who work at the national office. And if you really, really want to know more about the ELCA, they have an excellent website at elca.org, so you can find out more. Yes, sir.
Is there a Canadian or outside of the United States like complementary organization that believes the same stuff?
In Canada?
Yeah.
There's the Canadian Lutheran Church, the CLC. Yes.
Okay, there you go.
And there's, the Germany still has, a German Lutheran, it's the state religion in Germany. And so there are members of national, St. Matthew's has a pastor, the Greater Milwaukee Synod has a bishop, The whole ELCA has a presiding bishop. The presiding bishop belongs to the World Council of Churches and represents the United States amongst all the other Lutheran national leaders. So we're connected to other people every step of the way through. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yes?
You don't have to answer this if it gets you off track, but I'm just curious, like I have a friend who lives in Waukesha and she is Lutheran, but her church is not part of the ELC.
Yeah.
So, like, what does that mean?
Yes.
But you don't, I mean, if that gets you too off track, I can just look it up later or something.
No, it won't get me off track, but I think it's a different slide. So let's see.
There's a Finnish congregation in the greater Milwaukee area.
Yeah.
I discovered that because one of my coworkers was hiking and rang my doorbell one day. And he said, oh, I'm just campaigning for my church. Finnish.
Okay, I'm gonna skip this discussion part because you guys have lots of really good questions. And I'll just go through this quickly. There's an advantage of being part of this body of congregations, synods, the national church, and the Lutheran World Federation, right? And in my mind, these are some of the advantages. Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, which is now called what, Pastor Kevin?
Global Refuge.
Global Refuge. We have a World Hunger Organization. We have a Lutheran Disaster Response, Lutheran World Relief. We all work together to make those excellent organizations happen. So Lutheran Disaster Response gets money from the ELCA. So you give your offering, we give an offering to the synod gives an offering to the national church, and that provides the staff and support structure for organizations that do relief work all around the world. And that they can do that because they have this permanent staff and support structure and offices and everything else that's paid for by us. And so they can respond wherever there's need in the world. St. Matthew's couldn't do that by ourselves, right? We have the opportunity for cross-cultural partnerships locally and globally. So St. Matthew's is partnered with the Lutheran Church in El Salvador and the Lutheran Church in Tanzania. And here you go. I think this is part of your question. Part of what we do as an organization is that we write social statements on current issues like the climate, abortion, human sexuality, peace, and the death penalty. Those are just a few of the social statements that we have. There's a task force that gets together and researches and prays and writes a social statement. Those social statements are sent out to every congregation in all 8,500 of them in the ELCA. They travel different places and do listening sessions. They get back together, they rewrite the whole thing. It's a very, democratic process. It's not the bishops alone in a room figuring it out by themselves and then telling the rest of us. It's a very participatory process. And I would also add that if one of these issues is really important to you, it would be a good idea to go onto the ELCA website and read the social statement about human sexuality or about the death penalty. The ELCA is in full communion with the Presbyterian Church, now I'm not going to remember what RCA is. UCC is
United Church of Christ.
United Church of Christ, the United Methodist Church, the Episcopal Church, the Moravian Church, the Reformed Church in America is RCA. We're in full communion. You could go visit one of those churches and take communion at their church and, in full faith and not feel bad or weird about it, right? Or like you're stepping on somebody's toes, right? We're in full communion with these people, which means that you could also, we had the choice of calling an Episcopal priest to fill Pastor Kevin's position here at St. Matthew's. So it opens up lots of opportunities for cooperation and working together. Another advantage, I think, is that it's a really long process to become ordained in the ELCA. You have to do 3 years of graduate study, including things like ancient Greek and systematic theology. You have to do a year-long internship under someone who's already a pastor. You have to be interviewed by a committee like every year of your studies along the way. You have to write essays. It's a big deal. So that when we're looking for a new pastor, and Pastor Kevin puts in his paperwork and it says that he's been ordained in the ELCA, we can make many assumptions about what he knows, what he believes, and that he's been trained up, right? So when I came to St. Matthew's, people knew I had this graduate degree, right? I didn't get my ordination on the internet, right? And that I'd been taught about Lutheran history and Lutheran theology in particular. So those are some of the advantages of being part of a denomination that has a lot of members and a lot of oversight and a lot of hierarchy. It does mean that we have less autonomy and less flexibility. We can't be lone rangers. Okay, now I want to answer, yes, Kevin?
Can I just chime in on particularly on that fourth bullet point about the social statement?
Yes.
If there is a legacy in the ELCA about kind of coming out of the Reformation, it honestly is a commitment to not just having there be a kind of a top-down hierarchy where the pastors tell the congregants what to do and the bishop tells the pastors what to do. And so in practice, if you ever had a social statement committee being written, or pretty much any committee within our denomination has to have at least 50% plus 50% lay people on it. So it's not just, so we're not a church that's just governed by pastors and church leaders that are or professional church people.
These social statements are part of that reforming, always renewing attitude, because the Bible doesn't address some of these things directly, right? The Bible doesn't talk a ton about climate change, but we can interpret the Bible together in community and come to a stance about how we feel about creation and the climate change, so that that ancient text is always being interpreted and being made new in the world that we actually live in. Does that make sense? Okay. So, traditions. Let's see. Can you tell me your name, please?
Megan.
Megan. Let's tell Megan how we celebrate Lent at St. Matthew's. If you've been here for Lent before, what does it look like? Yeah, Julie.
Last year we did Taizé services midweek during Lent.
Yeah, so typically we have a Wednesday night service that's pretty contemplative and quiet. And there's a meal beforehand as well. So there's an extra service midweek during Lent. Anything else? Yeah.
I know there's one word you don't say,
One word we don't say? It's true, I can't say it. One liturgical way to kind of observe the Lenten season is to not say Alleluia. What else do we, what else do we do during Lent? Yes?
We apply ashes on Wednesday.
Yeah, so Ash Wednesday, you'll get ashes on your forehead and we'll take communion together. Anything else that we do? How about, oh yeah, Andy.
Like on the Wednesday evening services, we have like a dedicated family time, family worship time as well.
Yeah.
Right after dinner.
Yes, so after dinner, there's like an education component or there's family worship time component, which Pastor Kevin's kids love. And then there's the service after that. Yeah, it's kind of a whole evening. And then we get into Holy Week. So we celebrate Palm Sunday, the Sunday before Easter, when Jesus rides into Jerusalem. We celebrate Maundy Thursday, or the Last Supper and the washing of the disciples' feet. We have services on Good Friday to commemorate the crucifixion. And then we have services Easter Sunday as well. So it's a lot. But my guess is very similar to those of you who grew up Roman Catholic. Yeah? Okay. Did you have other questions about traditions?
Not specifically that I can think of right now.
Okay. You can ask anytime, but that's kind of Lent in a nutshell. Yeah, Alan?
Could you explain the significance of communion as compared with other churches? Is it the actual body and blood? Is it in with and under? Is it symbolic? I mean, where does that?
Yeah. So in the ELCA, we believe in consubstantiation, which means that the bread and the wine become the body and the blood, but they still are bread and wine. In the Roman Catholic Church, the bread and wine become the body and blood, and they are no longer bread and wine. So Martin Luther was like, still tastes like bread, still tastes like wine. I think it's still bread and wine. But it's also body and blood. In other churches, like in the Presbyterian Church, communion is a memorial. We do it and we remember what Jesus did at the Last Supper. It's not body and blood. And Martin Luther's feeling on that was like, if it's just bread and wine, what good is it, basically, in his very brash and kind of earthy way. So we believe it's both. It's bread and wine, and then it's body and blood and bread and wine. Which is why we don't technically commune with the Catholic Church. Because in the Catholic Church it becomes body and blood and is no longer bread and wine. And Lutherans don't believe that. So we don't share communion. Does that help? Okay. And this comes back to your question about different Lutheran churches. So there's a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and there's a Lutheran Church Wisconsin Synod, and there's the ELCA. And unfortunately, we don't work with other Lutherans doing pretty much anything together. I think it's really sad. In the Missouri Synod, you can only share communion with other people who are Missouri Synod. And for them, it's a matter of unity. Like, we know that everybody who is taking communion believes the same thing about what is happening. in my head, I'm like, can you get 5 people in a room who all believe the same thing? But, they don't ordain women and have a much kind of more literal sense of the Bible when they read it. In the Wisconsin Synod Lutheran Church, they only take communion with other Wisconsin Synod Lutheran churches. So even Wisconsin and Missouri churches don't do that together.
And you have to register before you take communion.
Yes, often. And they don't ordain women, and women don't have vote in their annual congregational meetings, and they can't teach Sunday school to children above the age of reason. So they can teach Sunday school to small children, but not to like middle school and high school aged children. For obvious reasons, I couldn't be a pastor in either the Missouri or Wisconsin Synod churches. They have different views about LGBTQIA issues, and they're also not allowed to pray with one another. So you'd think that we could, if we can't agree about communion, at least we could agree about prayer, but that is not the case. I think it's sad. You know, these are our brothers and sisters in Christ, and yeah, so your friend in Waukesha must be either Missouri Synod Lutheran or Wisconsin Synod Lutheran. Yeah, Andy.
But to be clear, our communion is open for all.
Yes. The stance of the ELCA and my personal belief is that that table, that altar does not belong to me, it belongs to Jesus. And Jesus is welcoming of everyone, right? So you don't have to be, we commune kids at this church as long as their parents approve. If you come through the door and I've never met you before, I'm going to give you communion. You know, if you're here for a baptism and your parents and grandparents are Roman Catholic and they come up, I'm going to give them communion. If you put your hands out, I'm going to put bread in your hands. Yes, you don't have to register for communion beforehand. If you come up, I'm putting bread in your hands. Yeah, Crystal.
So we're becoming new members,
Yes.
and these guys are getting their first communion with their cousin Jamie at the end of the month. And I know we went to the class, but he seems to be having a few questions, because like I know in the Catholic Church it's a big deal, and I'm like, well, it's a big deal, but it's not like, you're not gonna, like, I wore a dress and a veil, like, you know. So could you just give like a brief, like 30 seconds for these two as to kind of what to expect in a couple of weeks?
Yes.
Awesome.
So it's not, like your mom probably had a service and the focus of the service was all the kids getting their first communion. So you don't get your own service, unfortunately. You get to be in Sunday worship with the rest of the community, right? So it's important that you take communion with the whole church around you as part of the worship service. And you will come forward when it's time for communion, and the congregation will welcome you. They'll say, we welcome you to God's table, right? And other lovely words that I can't think of right now. And then you come up and you get to take communion first, because it's your first communion. And then we'll commune everybody else in the church. So sometimes it's like only the first communicants get communion at the first communion service. But this is for everybody in the whole community. And we want to welcome you, and we want to make you feel special by letting you go first. And then you can take pictures afterwards and all kinds of fun stuff. Okay. Yeah, Herb.
It even gets more complicated. In the 70s, the Missouri Synod, if you were in the non-geographic district, they had geographic, that was the more liberal branch. We had communion for children before confirmation also. And we got a lot of flack on that. In fact, one of our students was kicked out of a Missouri Synod parochial school when he announced he was receiving communion, until we informed that we'd done our research that infants were given communion in the early church. We would dip the finger in the wine and put it on the lips of the baby. And we just said we were much more orthodox than anybody else. And then the principal shut up like a clam.
There you go.
So there's so many variations, that's my only point.
Yes, there are. And I'm going to say right now, I am not an expert on the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church or the Wisconsin Synod Lutheran Church. This is what I know. Your experience may be different. And so I want to say it in the best light possible. I don't want to like poo-poo our brothers and sisters in Christ. For them, again, it is a matter of unity. That like almost like a family. Like this is what we believe. And so, and everybody who's taking communion believes the same thing. And it's probably a very powerful experience.
And on your positive note, our motivation was to get the children to be more a part of the congregation.
Yeah.
We had a fear of losing them to some extent.
Yeah.
And that's what motivated us.
Yes. So if you could go back to your friendly stranger and talk just for a couple minutes about, was there anything that was surprising to you? Was there anything that was new? Do you still have questions? Discuss.
In terms of this presentation, in terms of just being involved, I didn't realize that there was it is interesting to me just that the ELCA seems to be similar to other non-denominations than it does to other which is fun. To me, it almost seems like Missouri and Wisconsin synods are completely separate denominational way things go. There's a lot of semantics. Listening to this, what I'm hoping to hear in this church seems more similar to Catholic Church Mass than it does to what I'm hearing about these other churches to be honest with you. It's very similar.
It's a good like refresher to me because I'm like, what does make us different than Catholics or just any other denomination?
So I think if I didn't know, there might be a couple of things where I'd be like, oh, there's warnings and friends and beliefs. There are a lot of hilarious things, but otherwise, I don't think that I would know. No one told me this was a church.
It was Church of Christ. It was my first experience, and they took the Bible literally. I mean, it is word for word. So I'm a music teacher. I've been band for 14 years. And so when they're telling you that instruments aren't allowed in church, I'm like, oh, okay. That was a really hard one. And then like the wife is being like submissive and all that.
Okay, you can stay and chat if you'd like, but I just want to draw your attention to the fact that this Wednesday is Ash Wednesday. There are services at 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. on Ash Wednesday. New Member Sunday is next Sunday. Do you want to talk about that?
I do want to just share a quick announcement because I seem to be having some trouble with my email and I want to make sure you all know that next Sunday is New Member Sunday. Look for be in the commons area, you know, where we have the name tag table. We have certificates and we'll have special name tags for you so that people can identify you as a new member and welcome you. During the church service, you'll come up for a blessing. It's about 2/3 of the way through the service. And then after the service, in the commons, we'll have cake. And welcome you to stay and meet some folks from St. Matthew's and just celebrate with us. We're really excited for next Sunday. I'll send an email, but in case you don't get it, that's the spiel.
And
I'll
it's
bring
the
back your
8:30 service soon?
Yeah.
Okay.
Attend the 8:30 if you can. And then if you have any of those forms that were in the envelope, or if you have questions about those, bring it back and we can chat next Sunday. That's it.
So Ash Wednesday, this Wednesday, new member Sunday, next Sunday, and then Wednesday nights in Lent that begin with dinner in the fellowship hall, and then an education time up here with Sue, right? Or a family kind of music and worship time for people with kids. And then after that, at 7 o'clock, is the Taizé style worship service. That's what's coming up. Okay, I gotta do church, but if you guys want to find